conjures an image of a long-sought oasis in the desert, a lush illusion in the distance. But for Fleetwood Mac, mirage is no illusion. It's the latest oasis on the caravan for Fleetwood Mac, a group whose journey has been filled with twists and turns and peopled with nomadic musicians. Fleetwood Mac was originally formed in 1967 by guitarist Peter Green, bassist John McVie, and drummer Mick Fleetwood, all former members of John Mayall's Blues Breakers. Along with slide guitarist Jeremy Spencer, the group recorded their first album together in 1968.
I don't look for no worries. Worries and troubles come around.
The first few albums from this new band were firmly rooted in the blues and were quite popular in England.
When you squeeze it, baby, you make me holler, whoa, whoa, whoa.
But it wasn't until Santana recorded a Fleetwood Mac song called Black Magic Woman that the American public started to hear the name Fleetwood Mac.
I got a black magic woman. Got a black magic woman. Yes, I got a black magic woman. Got me so blind I can't see.
In 1969, Danny Kerwin joined the group as a third guitarist on the album Then Play On. Like most bands at the end of the 60s, Fleetwood Mac began to take a more experimental direction. But in May of 1970, just as the band was beginning to find a distinctive style of its own, Peter Green's growing interest in religion prompted him to retire from the music business.
Can't help about the shape I'm in. I can't sing, I ain't pretty, and my legs are thin. But don't ask me what I think of you. I might not give the answer that you want me to.
He just doesn't want anything to do with this business at all, period. That's really the main gripe that he had. Not in the States, but certainly in Europe, we were very successful with Peter Green fronting the band. I mean, he started Fleetwood Mac. And left his mark, although in actual fact he was only with the band, I think, a little over 2 years, and yet people still ask about Peter Green.
Without Peter Green at the helm, Fleetwood Mac sailed on under the creative leadership of Jeremy Spencer and Danny Kerwin. This version of the band was augmented in the studio by John McVie's wife, singer-keyboardist Christine McVie. They managed to record one album, Kiln House, before suffering another defection in the ranks. Jeremy Spencer, in the middle of an important U.S. tour in 1971, met a member of a religious cult on the street and disappeared without notice.
He's still with the Children of God. As a musician, he was lazy. He never developed in the way that I was always going on for him to do.
To replace Jeremy Spencer as a singer-songwriter, the band added Christine McVie as a permanent member and recruited California-bred guitarist Bob Welsh. Beginning with the album Future Games in 1971, it became increasingly difficult to detect Fleetwood Mac's original blues roots.
Take everything easy, show me a smile.
1972's Bare Trees album was their most successful yet in the U.S. Once again, the band was going through changes. This time, Danny Kerwin left, replaced by guitarist Bob Weston. This edition of the group released 2 albums over the next year, Penguin and Mystery to Me.
That's why it seems like
But somehow, things just didn't work out. By 1973, a series of personality clashes threatened to end the band. Bob Weston departed, and amidst the confusion, the group's manager claimed the rights to the name Fleetwood Mac, assembling a new group without any of the original members for an American tour. A long series of court battles ensued, preventing the real Fleetwood Mac from working for over a year. By 1974, the band had finally won their legal disputes, and after deciding to relocate in Los Angeles, settled their personal difficulties long enough to record a new album, Heroes Are Hard to Find.
Girl, you know
The stability in the band was brief. Early in 1975, Bob Welch became the next member to leave.
A great friend, you know, what can I say? I mean, he was a major part of Fleetwood Mac's legacy. And he made his choice when he left Fleetwood Mac to go off and spend some time just rethinking what he wanted to do, and then came up, you know, with his first album, and he's been going ever since. You know, I think he's doing pretty good.
Once again, faced with the possibility of the dissolution of Fleetwood Mac, Mick Fleetwood remembered an album he'd heard by a duo called Buckingham Nicks. After tracking down the struggling pair of songwriters, he took them totally by surprise, inviting them to become members of the band. The result was an album simply titled Fleetwood Mac, a record that went on to become the band's biggest seller up to that time.
You can take me to paradise, and then again you can be cold as ice. I'm over my head.
Stevie and I joined the band. Something that was brought to the band, the chemistry that was created by this particular fivesome from the first record, we were really doing quite well. By the time Rhiannon was a hit, you know, it was very clear that there was something that was happening that was very commercial, and I think Warner Brothers respected that. Certainly the track record between that album and Rumours more or less spoke for itself, and there was really very little intervention, and still is, you know, to Warner Brothers' credit, from the label in terms of trying to direct any artistic urges that we have.
After finally achieving the popularity that they'd always strived for, trouble once again struck the group. John and Christine McVie ended their 7-year marriage. Mick Fleetwood and his wife were divorced, and Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks split up their long-term relationship. Despite the emotional strain, the band stayed together. The songs on the next album, Rumours, reflected their situation.
Loving you isn't the right thing to do.
The fact that people took a great interest in what later became known as the musical soap opera. 4 of the band members were 2 couples, that those 2 couples were breaking up simultaneously during the beginning of the project, that we had to separate those feelings of pain at that time from the feeling that we had an important project that we had to finish, that we had to really keep our priorities straight. I think all of that is fairly apparent on the disc, and people really appreciated that sense of drama that was going on, because it was a very real sense of drama, and it was also something that a lot of other people could relate to, just a very common relationship problem. So that in itself, I think, had a lot to do with it. And it wasn't something that we were consciously trying to do in terms of, you know, singing to each other on the album or whatever. It's just that those songs were written about what was happening at the time. And aside from whatever critique you could make of the music or the accessibility of it or the commerciality of it, I mean, I think beyond a certain point, that really took over in terms of sales, and there was an aura about the album that had to do with all of that.